With all the European and North American governments operating with deficits at state and federal levels, there is very little money available for the industries and business that actually provide long-term productive jobs that reflect market demand and that grow economies, and that ultimately help us pay our taxes to pay down the debt that government has created. In fact, Stephen Harper says it will be 5 years before the Conservative government has a balanced budget. So we can expect massive deficits that will incur a national debt on a scale comparable or worse than the Mulroney years, which is what Stephen Harper and Preston Manning got into politics for in the first place. On October 20th, though, for example, the chief economist of the Toronto Dominion Bank predicted that the actual operating deficit for the fiscal 2009-2010 year will be closer to $100 billion, or over $4,000 debt for every single taxpayer, and that's you again. So it's either the worst ever at $56 billion or a horribly unimaginable $100 billion debt for just 1 year of government spending. Now, this is unsustainable unless money is simply printed up to make the shortfalls. And this is how the massive U.S. federal government deficits are being accounted for these days, printing massive quantities of paper money. And when that happens, the value of paper money drops relative to commodities like oil, gold, food, manufactured goods, and stronger currencies. That is why oil, gold, metals, and all other commodities are going up in price during a recession and high unemployment when prices should come down. How will these massive board operating deficits be paid back? Well, any combination of inflation, tax increases, currency devaluation, collapse of the entire monetary system are all likely scenarios. History is littered with societies ruined by currency inflation. Zimbabwe today, for example, and Germany in 1921 are very useful educational examples of what happens when government prints too much money. When banks refuse to lend governments any more money, the inevitable must occur. Inflation, as we saw in the 1977 to 1980 period, and I was there then, folks. I was operating my bookshop in London, Ontario, City Lights Bookshop, and interest rates and mortgage rates rose to 24%. I negotiated my house mortgage 1 year at 18%. So it was followed by a dramatic recession and high unemployment. And what are called essential services to Canadians get severely curtailed. Healthcare and hospitals, doctors get starved for funds. Schools and university and transit systems see massive cuts in funding. Infrastructure projects are canceled as money flows towards paying the huge debt buildup. Transfer payments to the provinces will get cut severely, and they'll require the provinces to raise taxes or curtail services. And that's what the Liberals had to do from 1994 to 1997 in order to operate the federal government without further increasing the deficit. Then from 1998 to 2005, the Liberals were able to make considerable headway paying down the accumulated national debt that the Mulroney years inflamed with deficit financing. I just want to repeat, Stephen Harper said there will be no deficits in the next year, only a year ago on October 12, 2008, 3 days before he was elected. Now, another thing that comes to mind when we're talking about government handing out money, losing money and mismanagement of money, is Canada's Economic Action Plan and Harper's so-called stimulus spending. On October 15, 2009, a swarm of Conservative members of Parliament were seen on TV and in newspapers holding billboard-like presentation checks, taxpayer money doled out to various dubious projects across Canada. And the arrogance of these cheesy photo ops were immediately noticed. Many of these presentation checks had Conservative Party logos displayed prominently on them, and others had Stephen Harper's own signature as the payer, as if it came out of his own personal bank account. And all these giant presentation checks representing your money were shown in big shades of blue and white, Conservative Party colors. Stephen Harper's signature on presentation checks? Come on, Conservative Party logos, Tory blue colors? Is it King Harper now giving out his own largesse from the Crown Treasury? It's more like, I think, Quebec Premier Maurice Duplessis, who ruled Quebec with favors and intimidation in the doling out of taxpayer dollars when he was Premier of Quebec from 1943 to 1959. In Duplessis' Quebec, districts that elected his Union Nationale candidates to the Quebec National Assembly, well, they received taxpayers' dollars for roads and sidewalks and parks, sewers, and the like. And those Quebec districts that elected Liberal MNAs received little or no infrastructure dollars at all. This is a classic Duplessis bit of extortion. Vote for the Liberals at your own peril, or vote for us and get services with your tax dollars. Well, now Stephen Harper is the new Maurice Duplessis. Called Canada's Economic Action Plan, or stimulus spending, it is pork barrel politics, a Canadian political tradition that the Reform Party of 1993 found most offensive. Delivering the pork always has had resonance in Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. These eastern provinces traditionally have had high unemployment, seasonal work, old industries, and traditional union politics. And transferring wealth from Ontario and especially the western province in order to buy votes in Quebec and the Atlantic provinces was standard operating politics for the federal Liberals since William Lyon Mackenzie King in 1945 and even the Diefenbaker and Mulroney Conservative years. Transfer payments have always been the most visible, quote, benefit for the eastern provinces like Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, and even being in Confederation. The 1993 Reform Party was completely hostile to this transfer of wealth. It came at great cost to Alberta with its dynamic resource industries of oil, gas, metals, and cattle, and it had no benefits for Alberta. The Reform slogan was "The West wants in," and that was in reaction to the exploitation of Alberta and BC within Confederation. Originally, Reform understood pork. Any benefit to transfer payments is illusory. It is the transfer of income from genuine market-created productive jobs, say, for example, in Alberta and British Columbia, where lumber or metals or mining or ranching or oil and gas and all these things, tourism, that wealth was real. That's created. And what was being done was that money was being transferred to those that weren't working or industries or activities that can't be sustained without continual infusions of welfare or stimulus payments courtesy of the expensive and inefficient hand of the federal government. No doubt the recipients of these tax-funded handouts are grateful, but what is required is genuine opportunity, not welfare. These supplicant populations should migrate to where the market-oriented jobs are. Instead, the wealth creators are stifled by the high taxes and expensive government, and their ability to reinvest in their successful endeavors is hobbled by the transfer of their good money to bad places where little authentic growth through the market choices is possible. And persons in industries that receive these stimulus dollars, known as pork, boondoggles, quangos, or bringing home the bacon, become dependent on the continual infusions of pork and the political collusion that makes it possible. Instead of investing in market-motivated growth, these patronized industries become experts in extracting taxpayer largesse out of the political system through political donations, kickbacks, bribery, and lobbying. But Harper is delivering the pork in a way that ought to make Reform founder Preston Manning cringe. Harper is his acolyte. Conservative ridings, for example, are receiving a far greater percentage of the pork than Liberal NDP or Bloc Québécois ridings. In Nova Scotia, Tory ridings receive 42% more on average than NDP or Liberal ridings. In Quebec, the 10 Conservative ridings have received 62% more per riding than if the money was spent in Quebec under Canada's Economic Action Plan, or CAN-PORC for short, we'll call it, was evenly divided up. Many Montreal area ridings with Bloc Québécois or Liberal MPs received just one project with minuscule funding. And in a backhanded tribute to an Ontario decimated by recession, it became the leading welfare recipient of these CAN-PORC projects. Ontario got 54% of the total stimulus spending, with only 39% of the population, again weighted heavily in Conservative districts. The 51 Tory ridings received on average $2.1 million per riding in pork, and NDP, now that they're the propping up of the government, received $1.86 million per riding in pork, where Liberal ridings only received an average of $1.36 million. Harper's government so far has refused to issue even a list of all the federal CAN-PORC projects and what ridings have received what money, despite the promise of one. With a straight face, the Prime Minister was on television defending the partisan pork Conservative MPs. He says, Conservative MPs have been working very hard, obviously, in many cases, securing projects for their ridings. I would encourage the other parties to work equally hard. End quote. Accompanying this giant handout of cash to impress voters with their own tax money and a lot of debt is this national advertising campaign we've all seen far too much on about Canada's Economic Action Plan. It's cost over $35 million to buy these ads, and this is your tax money. Now, this is propaganda. Propaganda can be defined as messaging that manipulates the audience into a foregone conclusion without the benefit of facts, true information, or content. And the Economic Action Plan ad campaign assures us in soothing shades of blue, with scenes of clean, shiny, happy working Canadians, that the federal government is putting Canada to work again. The subtext to the campaign is to sell Canadians on the idea that massive federal deficits are unimportant, that government's primary function is to spend your money to create jobs and not that of the marketplace. These ads conceal that this stimulus spending is achieved with massive deficit financing, ultimately higher taxation or inflation of the currency, and that the taxpayer must repay one day through inflation, taxes, reduced services, degraded monetary system, and other calamities we've yet to experience. Meanwhile, a huge amount of taxpayer money is flowing to a cash-strapped corporate media for this propaganda barrage.